Hello, I am Lauren After Father, Director of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. Welcome to the Holocaust Center's 2021 commemoration of Yom HaShoah, the Hagvura, a memorial to the Holocaust and heroism. In 2020, we offered our first online commemoration of Yom HaShoah. As we began to appreciate the potential of virtual programs to include more community members and students, it was counterintuitive, but we quickly accepted this as truth. We began to think about this year's commemoration, and we envisioned a plan that would make the most of what we've learned and how we can bring the community together. I want to thank leadership of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh for your vision. Our chair, Barbara Shapira, Danny Shapira, the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh, our generous donors and sponsors, the Yom HaShoah Committee, which worked so hard on this program year after year, teachers and students of the Light Education Initiative, who interviewed 11 survivors and members of our Generation Speakers Bureau for today's program. I'd also like to thank the intrepid staff of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh: Emily Bernstein, Tanya Bielski-Brom, Jackie Reese, Christina Sahovi, Marcel Walker, Ryan Woodward, and our latest associate, founder of the Light Education Initiative, Nick Haberman. Without this incredible team, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. So I want to thank you all for working so hard and managing to stay connected while we all work from home over the past year. Speaking of the past year, we've lost many of our beloved Holocaust survivors over this year of isolation. There will be a noticeable absence in today's commemoration. For many of our 40 years, Cantor Moshe Taube, of blessed memory, opened this program with his soaring voice. We're grateful to Cantor Henry Shapiro, a student of Cantor Taube's, for accepting our invitation to participate this year. In love and brotherhood, ba'ahava ve'achva, join us as we honor the memories of 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust, celebrate the resilience of survivors, and thank the righteous among the nations and liberators of the Nazi camps. Nizkor, we will remember.
There are many who question the continued presence of an annual Yom HaShoah commemoration, suggesting that it's time that we move on. My response would be, move on to what? Have the lessons of the most horrific example of inhumanity ever been learned? We who gather this evening know the answer. The tragedy is that those who ask the question do not. It would be overly simplistic on my part to coldly state that if you carefully view the history of the world, when there are periods of stress, anti-Semitism increases in frequency. But that is not an excuse. There is no excuse for anti-Semitism, or, for that matter, any form of bigotry, racism, or prejudice that exists. Yet they persevere. I call to mind the story of Noah, where God's response to the presence of evil on the world that God created is to flood the entire planet and call a do-over, a reboot. Creation version 2.0. After all the creatures have departed from the ark, and Noah has fulfilled God's command, Noah builds an altar to God, offering a sacrifice to God in gratitude. The text tells us that God smells the pleasing odor and, in an incredibly powerful moment, God speaks to himself saying, "Never again will I doom the earth because of man, since the devisings of man's mind are evil from his youth." Wow! God just admitted that humanity's default behavior is evil. I would like to suggest an interpretation of God's thinking that can speak volumes to us today. While God suggests that humanity has an inclination to do evil, that does not mean that we have to follow that inclination. We can also choose to do good. Life is about making choices and the consequences of those choices. We gather on Yom HaShoah to mourn the incomprehensible loss of life that our people suffered. Yet, we must temper that with those who chose to do good. The Raoul Wallenbergs, Shiuni Sugaharas, Sir Nicholas Wintons, and Oskar Schindlers, just to mention a few. We recognize more than ever that Holocaust education is a critical element in the education of all youth around the world. However, despite what may seem like insurmountable challenges, I prefer to see opportunities for growth, compassion, and ways to impact the next generation for good. To quote the beautiful simplicity of Anne Frank, in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. I regularly refer to this quote, for despite what I have witnessed in my life, I too believe that the vast majority of people on this planet are good, decent people. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. You who creates peace in the heavens, guide us to create peace here on earth, now more than ever, and let us all say, Amen.
I just wanted to mention a couple things before I start. First of all, I am honored to be able to sing the Anima Amin and Kel Male in the shoes of Cantor Tabe, someone who had passed this past year and we miss very much here in Pittsburgh and around the world. Secondly, I wanted to mention the lights on either side of the bima here are 6 lights, not the 7 lit menorah that we see for Shabbat, but the Parkway a number of years ago put up a 6 light candelabra menorah in honor of the 6 million. I begin with Ani Ma'amin. Ay, 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 ay. Ani Ma'amin. Ani Ma'amin. Ani Ma'amin. Be'emunah shleimah, beviat HaMashiach, beviat HaMashiach ani ma'amin, אף על פי שיתמהמה עם כל זה אני מאמין. We now rise for the Kel Male memorial prayer for the departed in memory of the 6 million. El Male Rachamim Shochein Bamromi Amsei Menucha Nechon Ha Tachat Kanfei Hashchina B'Mahalot Kedoshim Otarim Kazohar Harakia Mazirim Et Nishmot Kol Achenu B'nei Yisrael Anachishim Nashim V'Tahor שנטבחו ושנחנקו ושנשרפו ושנהרגו. בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם הנע בעל הרחמים. אז תירם כסתר כנפיך לעולם ימים. וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו ושלום על משכבותיהם ונאמר אמן.
What was your life like before it was interrupted by the war and the Shoah?
My grandparents' lives in Germany were really normal lives. Like I said, they did not think of themselves as different from their fellow citizens. And in a lot of ways, they were really comfortable. So you can imagine that uprooting of, you hear about immigrants a lot. And when you imagine what it is that people leave, like if someone flees their country, when I think about my grandparents, I think about what it must have taken for them to want to leave their lives, right? Their families, their communities that they had lived in and had wonderful, comfortable, kind of easy lives until all of a sudden it wasn't.
Before the war, life in Poland was it was difficult, but it was simple and peaceful. No one could have envisioned what was going to happen to the Jewish people once Hitler came to power. But once he came to power and began spreading his anti-Semitic hatred, everything changed.
He was an only child and went to school like any other child, and life was normal. And he attended synagogue and had friends and went on vacations with his parents. My mother attended a non-Jewish kindergarten, and everyone was nice to her. She walked to school and everything was fine until about 1938. She had a younger brother and they had fun together, and she attended Hebrew school.
Well, I had no life before the Shoah because I was born in 1941, 1942. The exact date is not known. And this is where the Nazis were already in the what was then Poland, now it's the Ukraine.
I come from a very Orthodox Jewish family. And my family were also manufacturers. My mother was an entrepreneur, as her father was, and she's the one who started us in business.
What were you like when you were a teenager?
She was very close with her family. She really liked being outdoors and working with animals.
My father was apprenticed early, so he worked and helped out the family. My mother helped her family. Her father died when she was 10, and so she took over her father's job, which was a mailman. So she would walk through the town and go through to the farms and help the farmers deliver mail, and not only deliver mail, but read letters and write letters for them. I don't know how much of a childhood or teenage years they actually had. They didn't talk too much about it.
It was nothing, not a big thing. The good thing was that as I went on vacation to my aunt, that's how I met my future family. And I have aunt and uncle who lived in Budapest, and then in winter time we went up. My parents let me go to my uncle, and my boyfriend bought opera ticket, concert ticket. It was wonderful. He was very smart, very well educated, and he was my teacher. I learned a lot from him. That's all can add. That was my teenager. Very short,
very short, because at 16, she was taken away from everything she knew.
Yes, and I was certainly not prepared for that terrible, terrible place.
My father had a great childhood. He was living in a village where they farmed and also were raising sheep up in the mountains. So he was definitely a country boy with a lot of freedom to run. And my mother lived in a small town where she was the youngest of 7 children. So she was very coddled. But as far as her teenage years, you know, she was 14 when she was taken away to Auschwitz. And what always struck me is my mother-in-law, American mother-in-law, used to talk about the dances at the Jewish Community Center. When she was 16, how they would go to these dances. And every time she mentioned them and her life and how they would crash weddings, I would think about where my parents were at that very same time. And my mother was in Auschwitz when she was 16. And the only reason why one had different life from the other was geographical. All those things that belonged to teenage years were stripped away from them because of the Holocaust. And those were actually their very worst years.
My father really had no teenage life, as he had to grow up very fast in order to cope with the situation. He lived in fear and was worried about his parents. My mom was deported from Germany when she was 12 on October 22nd, 1940. She went to several schools and was in several orphanages and had non-Jewish friends with her at these schools where she was hiding in France.
Like I said, I was a little immigrant girl, so I was very, very focused on wanting to be an all-American teenage girl.
In 1950, we were finally able to get a visa to the United States. And myself and my parents came to Washington, PA. We were sponsored by the Jewish organization there. So by that time, I was already like 13 years old. I mean, I couldn't speak any English or anything. However, they placed me in 8th grade. I mean, I had a friend whose parents spoke a little bit of German, so I could understand what was going on. But it took me a long time to learn, English. But I had a very good English teacher. I was trying to fit in. That's why I didn't even talk about it. I figured, like, I was listening to my parents when they said, we brought you here, forget about what happened and make the best out of it. And that's what I've been trying to do all along.
In many ways, I was a misfit because I was an immigrant. I was 14 years old when I came to the United States after having lived 6 years in France. So I had to learn a new language, which I spoke with a foreign accent. And although Americans, at least back then, loved the French accent, there was still an accent. And I really did not fit. I was very different from American teenagers. Having gone through the war, I was much more mature than my peers in one way. In a social way, I was much less sophisticated. I was still a child. When I came to the United States and I went to school, my classmates had a different outfit every single day. Are you kidding me? I was happy I had two outfits.
My teenage years were in Israel already. So I went to elementary school from second grade to high school Then I went to the Israeli army, and then I went to the university and so forth.
In Israel, I was put in an orphanage because I didn't have a father. My mother couldn't handle four of us, was impossible. Besides, the Israeli government wanted us to learn Hebrew as fast as we can. So they said if you put us together with other boys, we learn Hebrew fast. And indeed we did. Because when I came into that orphanage, there were about 7 different languages there. Lithuania, Polish, Romanian, Czechoslovakian, So in the beginning, we just fought each other all the time, bloody, because we didn't understand each other. But after 6 months, we already we already spoke Hebrew.
What do you think the war changed about your parents?
People used to kind of laugh and say, oh, my grandmother is like a glass is half empty kind of person. And when you think about your entire extended family being murdered and your parents being murdered and you trying to get them out and not doing that successfully and living with that guilt and trying to raise a family in America and not have them be afraid of being Jewish and having them be positive and stuff, and moving to America. She barely spoke English. She and my grandfather had $18 to their names when they came off the boat in America in 1938. And I kind of think, I don't even know how she got up every day, like to put one foot in front of the other and have a really positive attitude can be really hard. And so I give her a lot of credit because she and my grandfather built and had an amazing life in America, but they also lived with a lot of personal trauma.
Well, I know that you have to appreciate the good thing in life because you never know what will happen to you. And I thank my mother that she forced me to do things, but many teenager parents didn't. And I think that's helped me a lot.
Maybe it made me more sensitive to people suffering, even though I didn't personally suffer a great deal, but certainly had sort of a shattering experience. And I like to think it made me a little bit more sympathetic.
Afterwards, she found out that a cousin had survived, but pretty much everyone in her immediate family and her extended family were killed. I think my grandmother, it wasn't like today where people have better access to mental health services, but I'm pretty sure from things my grandmother and my dad told me that my grandmother had some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder, and she was depressed for a long time. And it also, I think because of the war, even though my grandparents didn't marry till after the war, when they married and had my dad, they really didn't want to live in Hungary, a country that they'd experienced so many bad things in. So they were really determined to come to America and, raise my father in a country that they felt was better than Hungary.
It made me realize, how good things are instead of what happened. And I was very happy to come to the States Although, every time I try to ask my parents about, how difficult, especially my father, how difficult it was, neither one of them really wanted to talk about it because they figured we brought you here to the United States and to make the most of it.
I think their personalities changed quite a bit. I know that my uncle used to say that my mother's personality had changed a lot. Before, she was much more confident and much more self-assured. And after the war, she was very anxious and nervous about things.
The war made my dad an orphan, and he realized there's so much hatred in the world.
I became a Catholic when I was 5 years old. So from the age of 5, I knew I was acting in a sense. You want to look at it from a child's point of view. I was an actress on a big stage. And if I screwed up, my whole family died. So that put quite the responsibility on me, on my behavior, what I did, what I didn't do, what I said, more important, what I did not say. And what I have, the major remnant of that I have is that I am extremely alert to my environment because that was essential for survival. You had to be alert in order to identify if danger lurked around or, what the situation was, demanding that I behave one way or another. I had to learn to think on my feet.
What do you think your life would have been like had it not been interrupted by the Holocaust?
One of the things that was surprising to me when I went to Germany is I met people who were my cousins, like third, fourth, fifth cousins that I didn't even know existed because my mom's family was always so small. Like we would get together for holidays with third or fourth cousins because we didn't have a big family. Like my mom did not have grandparents. To think about being part of a large family, that this huge extended family is almost mind-boggling because my great-grandfather, Emil, was one of 10 children.
My parents would have been surrounded by their relatives. My parents would have had aunts and uncles and cousins living nearby. I would have benefited from that. I didn't have that. So I grew up with my parents only and so-called aunts and uncles who were living near us, who were also fellow survivors that met up with my parents after the war when they were all recovering in the Tatra Mountains. So imagine not being able to communicate with your first cousins. And the war did that. It scattered the family to 3 different continents, to Israel, to Russia, to Hungary, to America, and speaking all different languages.
But I think about for my grandmother, she would have had so much more family. And I think raising my father after the war with my grandfather, they didn't have extended family to really lean on. And I know growing up, my grandparents babysat us a lot and helped my parents raise me and my brother and sister. So I think they didn't have that sort of rich extended family to help them out.
It probably would have been normal had it not been interrupted, since he would have had his parents, and perhaps he could have attended a university. My mom would have had friends, gone to college, and would have had her brother and maybe even nieces and nephews. She still would have had her mother, and then her parents would have been together as her father left for America before the war. They would have been able to still have the grocery store that her parents owned in their town of Bruchsal, Germany.
We probably would have lived peacefully in the small town in Poland that I was born, because I don't know how many generations that that we were.
Well, we probably would have been in Hungary, and and by then we would have had maybe a half a dozen factories or more. The business was growing. I would probably live in Poland. I don't know really what my life would be, a regular life in Poland. But this is the way how it happened. Much so, yes, it did shape me. I think that I always felt a stranger, an outsider, because I really was not part of any family. I was not a part of my aunt who took me from the Polish family. I was not part of my father's family who remarried. I was really not part of my aunt that I lived with. I felt an outsider. Yeah.
What was stolen from you and your family during the Shoah?
Everything. Everything.
Everything. Everything.
My childhood, my livelihood for my parents. I never had a child. I was a child till 6 years old, 6 years and 2 months old.
So what was stolen from them was the sense of belonging, their life, their dignity, their freedom.
So they had taken art and furniture and other things. But those are just the physical things. I think the family and the family stories and the family history, you know, there's big gaps.
A lot of things are stolen. Of course, the biggest thing is the family. Some of we don't even know how most of our family were killed because they wound up in concentration camps. And that's the worst part of it, not knowing what happened to the relatives and not really knowing my grandparents.
Basically, their family life, they were very poor, and so they did not have anything physical to steal from them, nothing in their homes that was worth anything except whatever artifacts they had for the holidays. So it was basically the family and their lifestyle.
My dad's father and uncle's wholesale silk business in Vienna, Austria was stolen. His parents, his teenage life, and everything else. The grocery store was stolen by the Nazis and given to non-Jews, and their home was taken away from them. Since her father left in 1938, she wasn't able to be with him for 8 years.
Life was taken from us more than anything else. It was life, it was people. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother had a shop. So of course the shop was something like grocery store. And then what was inside the homes? These were not really riches, but property, right?
What lessons would you want to teach younger generations?
Love each other. Love each other. You never know what can happen in life.
Appreciate all that is good in your life and be grateful for it.
And I think it is that the human spirit is strong in the end, and it prevails and it survives. And scars and all, it goes on.
For people to understand that this can happen anywhere. Her family was very comfortable and well accepted and integrated into the community. And in a matter of days to weeks after the occupation, you know, they were kicked out of their house and put in a ghetto and eventually sent to a concentration camp. And it sounds like something that couldn't happen anywhere else, but we know from history that this didn't just happen, you know, in Europe during the Holocaust, but in Cambodia and other places in the world where there's genocide. And I think she would want people to just always be aware of when people's rights are being taken away and to stick up for people, if you have privilege, if you have power, to use that voice to help people that are being discriminated against or persecuted.
To understand this, to try to make the world better. Just speak out when you can against hate and prejudice. The Holocaust was awful, and look, even now, there's so many people all over the world being punished, being killed. Why? That's always the question. What can we do about it? The only thing we can do about it is speak out and stay away from hate and prejudice.
I think they would want people to be strong, to be able to be able to survive things that seem difficult to them and not give up, to be able to live their life no matter what, because their life as they knew it was taken away from them. And when they came to the United States and started all over again. And they would want you to speak up, not to just accept whatever is given to you blindly, but to fight for what you think is right.
Appreciate your parents and don't hate people of other religions or color.
Tolerance, to be tolerant of others, to be tolerant of other faith, people who have other faith whatever it is, of other ways of life, not to persecute others because they're different, and not to pick on others either.
Be less frivolous. Take things seriously. Read the news. Pay attention to what's going on, not just in your country, not just in your neighborhood, but in your neighborhood, in your state, in your country, in the world.
Don't try to be older than you are, because life is short enough.
I'm lighting the candle in honor of my grandparents.
My father, who I love so dearly, and all those uncle, aunt, cousins. I cannot enumerate how many of my family perished in the camp. That this should never, ever, any form happen to people.
So when I light my candle, it's for all those who suffered.
I light this candle in memory of my mother and my father and my brother Yaakov. Yaakov was a soldier. He was killed in the Suez Crisis.
And I'm actually going to light it in memory of my grandmother, Rivka, who I'm named after, and her two children who she held by the hand as they walked in the gas chamber. Yehuda, who was 10, and Sina, who was 8. And I want to light this candle in memory of the millions of children who there was no memory of, who never had a chance to realize their potential, and whose light was extinguished way before it should have been. Thank you.
So I light this candle in memory of my grandparents and their families. My grandmother really lost all of her parents, her sister, her niece, and the same on my grandfather's side of the family, although we didn't talk about him. And I want their memories to live on through, me and my siblings, but now also through you all, and that you've learned about it. And hopefully it's something that you can, draw on in your lifetime.
I would like to light this candle, for my uncles and great parents rather. I can light the candle here. And actually also for the 1.5 million children that perished during the Holocaust. A lot of them really didn't even know what the Holocaust was all about. They were so young.
I'm going to light the candle for my family that was killed, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my half-siblings that did not survive. And so I'm going to light this candle in their memory. Thank you.
So I had the candle. Yes, it's for my mother. Her name was Miriam.
So it is in the memory of this cousin, the only cousin on my father's side that I lost, that I would like to light this candle. Okay. And I pass this candle on to you.
Words of Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish, connect us to the generations who have gone before us and to the many who were killed in the Holocaust. These words praise God from the depth of human tragedy and affirm God's presence still endures, even when that still small voice appears to be silent. Offered in a staccato formulation, our voices, like our steps, proclaim like drum beats, we are still here. I invite you to rise physically or in spirit as we affirm these words hallowed by the generations. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah, Be'alma Divra Chirute V'yamlich Malchute, B'chayechon Uvyomechon, Uvchaye Dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala V'zman Kariv V'imru. Amen. Yehe Shemei Rabbah Mevorach Leolam Ulamei Almayah. Yit Barach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitramam V'yitnaseh. V'yit hadar, v'yit aleh, v'yit halal, shemei kudsha barich, hu le'elah min kol birchata v'shirata, tush bechata v'nechamata, damiran be'alma v'imru, amen. Yehe shalama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen.
In a world of total moral collapse, there was a small minority who mustered extraordinary courage to uphold human values. These were the righteous among the nations. They stand in stark contrast to the mainstream of indifference and hostility that prevailed during the Holocaust. Contrary to the general trend, these rescuers regarded the Jews as fellow human beings who came within the bounds of their universal obligation. There were different degrees of help. Some people gave food to the Jews, thrusting an apple in their pocket or leaving food where they would pass on their way to work. Others directed Jews to people who could help them. Some sheltered Jews for one night and told them that they would have to leave in the morning. The main forms of help extended by the righteous among the nations include hiding Jews in the rescuer's home or on their property, providing false papers and false identities, and smuggling and assisting Jews to escape. Most rescuers were ordinary people. Some acted out of political, ideological, or religious convictions. Others were not idealists, but merely human beings who cared about people around them. In many cases, they never planned to become rescuers and were totally unprepared for the moment in which they had to make such a far-reaching decision. They were ordinary human beings, and it is precisely their humanity that touches us and should serve as a model. In honoring the righteous among the nations, let us also honor the righteous who walk among us. In this past year, a year that has been unlike any other in our memory, and one that has been full of collective grief due to the COVID-19 pandemic, let us also take a moment now to think of the compassion and selflessness displayed by the scores of nurses and other medical personnel, first responders, teachers, and all other essential workers. For over a year, they have been doing their jobs, treating sick patients, and keeping our society moving forward in so many ways. With incredible gratitude, I light this candle in honor of the memory of all of those who are the righteous among the nations.
My name is Jim Lucot, and I'm very honored here to discuss the Liberators of the Holocaust. I've been very fortunate to have met several Liberators, and two of them became my friends. Staff Sergeant Paul Holofsky, who was a Pathfinder in the 82nd Airborne Division, and Captain Vinny Vicari, who was the artillery officer of the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. These two fine gentlemen never met each other before, but I was fortunate enough to bring them together. Individually, I interviewed them, and what I would like to share with you in this brief moment is that both of these individuals were in heavy combat, which they were prepared for, and they were in units which I would apply the moniker, the tip of the spear. They both were in multiple combat engagements. They both had men under them that died. They had men that they ordered that were killed. They were both wounded. And the only time that I've ever seen them cry is when they talked about liberation. And it was very difficult for them to discuss liberation, and I think it was very hard for them to incorporate that into what they were attempting to do at the time. They had no training for that, and I think that is their most difficult memory, and it was their most difficult adjustment. And it was eerie to me how similar their stories of liberation were, and prior to them meeting each other. And sadly, they're both passed away, but they would be extremely proud knowing the recognition that the Liberators are getting today for having something that was added to their almost impossible mission to have liberation put on top of that. I light this candle in honor of all the victims that Captain Vicari and Sergeant Holofsky could not liberate in time.
In the years immediately following World War II, hundreds of thousands of Holocaust survivors languished in displaced persons camps throughout Europe. With few countries willing to take in these Jewish refugees, Jewish communities in the United States took note of their co-religionists' plight. Pittsburgh was one of 100 towns and cities throughout the United States that brought over and resettled Holocaust survivors. Eventually, more than 300 Holocaust survivors settled in Pittsburgh. All of them had suffered unspeakable loss. The Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh was founded by survivors, and many have remained involved throughout the past 40 years. The survivors we have been privileged to know have left an indelible impact on the lives of all who have been fortunate to have met them. Whether it was through the survivor bravely sharing their stories with school students and other groups, volunteering at Yom HaShoah and other events over the past 4 decades, writing or recording their testimonies for others to learn from for years to come, or remaining involved with the center in so many other ways, we are all better people for having known them. This past year has been a particularly difficult year for the Pittsburgh survivor community. The COVID-19 pandemic has kept them isolated, unable to see each other and students in person, and concerned about contracting this devastating disease. Pittsburgh has lost some beloved members of our community, in particular this past year. May their memories, all of the survivors lost in this past year and in the years prior, be a blessing. I light this candle in honor of Pittsburgh's Holocaust survivors and Holocaust survivors around the world.
Never say that you now go on your last way, though darkened skies may now conceal the blue of day, because the hour for which we've hungered is so near. Beneath our feet the earth shall thunder, we are here. From land of palm trees to the far-off land of snow, we shall be coming with our torment, with our woe, and everywhere our blood has sunk into the earth, shall our bravery, our vigor blossom forth. We'll have the morning sun to set our day aglow. Our evil yesterdays shall vanish with the foe. But if the time is long before the sun appears, then let this song go like a signal through the years. This song was written with our blood and not with lead. It's not a song that summer birds sing overhead. It was a people amidst burning barricades that sang this song of ours with pistols and grenades. So never say you now go on your last way, though darkened skies may now conceal the blue of day, because the hour for which we've hungered is so near. Beneath our feet the earth shall thunder, we are here. Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst im letzten Weg, hat Schimmeln bleien verstellen bleie Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schau, s wird apoikt on unser Trott mir seinen da. Von grünen Palmenland bis weißen Land von Schnee, wir kommen an mit unser Pein, mit unser Weh. Und wo gefallen ist a Spritz von unser Blut, sprotzen wird durch unser Gwure, unser Mut. Es wird die Morgensonne begilden uns dem Heind, und der Nächten wird verschwinden mit dem Feind. Nur heut versammeln wird die Sonne in dem Kajor, wie a Parol soll gehen das Lied von Dort zu Dort. Das Lied geschrieben ist mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Liedl von a Vogel läuft der frei. Das hat a Volk zwischen fallen dicke Wend, das Lied gesungen mit Naganes in der Hand. Da sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst im letzten Weg, hat Schimmeln bleien verstellen bleie Tag. Kommen wird nach unser ausgebänkte Schau, s wird apoikt und unser Trott mir seinen da.